folks, I wish you could have been with me all week because I looked at far more videos than we're going to have time for tonight. There are so many incredible examples of unique designs not possibly replicated or cobbled together from other animal sources because those features don't exist in other animals. We're going to look at several of those tonight. If you're watching online, you'll have, if you watch the recording later, there will be more of these animals than we have time for tonight. Because what we're going to do is we're going to spend about 40 minutes going through some of the most important examples in the list of animals that I found. And we won't get through very many. And then we're going to spend the last half, about an hour, on a really cool movie. And we have popcorn for that segment, so you definitely want to stay around for that. And it'll be a little surprise what that segment's going to be about, but I guarantee you won't be disappointed. So what we're going to do tonight is, it's very simple. You can see your outline is very blank. It's just write down some thoughts about what stands out to you with these incredible animals. We talked about Romans 1 before, and it says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen from what has been made." And that's what we're talking about tonight. So this is kind of a night where, as I've labeled it, kind of an awe and wonder night. I want you to just relax and enjoy thinking about what God has done in his creation. So we'll look at some of these incredible animals, and then well, I guess I've told you there, the special focus will be butterfly metamorphosis, which is a much deeper story than I ever realized until we watched this movie. I can't put the movie onto the recorded version because it's copyrighted, but you get to watch it tonight. So if somebody watches the online version, they'll get the promo, and they'll be encouraged to rent or buy it themselves. But it's still under copyright protection, so we can't make it part of the video that we spread out far and wide. So there's a lot of scriptures on animals. This is not all of them, but there are a couple. It talks about God creating the animals, and then it talks about giving the animals what they need. So they're given green plants to eat for food, and that's all Genesis 1. But then we have the fall of man and the flood, and everything changes. And at that point, we have the fear and dread of humans being implanted somehow onto the animals, and everything that lives now is food, protein at that point. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. So that's Genesis 9 after the fall. And then if we go to one verse after that, in Psalms, this next verse says that, "Praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures and all ocean depths, lightning and hail, snow and clouds." And again, it's flying birds and creatures. Those things praise the Lord and point to his name as well. All of these things are examples of the creativity and power of God. And so we get to just marvel at that tonight. A few other places in Job. I'm always kind of, half-hearted when it comes to Job until we get to where God's speaking, right? Because up until that point, you don't know if this is going to be something God's going to override when he gets to his chapters. But when we get to Job 39 and he talks about the animals, he lists a whole bunch of animals and gives some characteristics. Mountain goats and wild donkeys and the wild ox, the ostrich. This is a fun passage because we find out here that the ostrich is actually foolish. It does not take good care of its young. Somehow the young survive, but otherwise we might have been tempted to think, well, we just don't understand the ostrich. It's misunderstood, right? No, it's actually foolish. God made it that way. But he gave it also some incredible power of running and speed and defensive capability. I mean, you can't attack an ostrich because they kick at the predators and just send them flying. So ostriches. And then the horse, the way it loves battle and snorts and goes into the fight. Hawks and eagles. And then there's this incredible passage in Job 40 where it talks about behemoth or behemoth. I've heard this pronounced several different ways. But this incredible animal that is not an elephant, it turns out. It starts out, you're thinking it's going to be an elephant, but it really sounds like some of the great extinct dinosaurs. A tail like a cedar, that's not an elephant. The thighs are close-knit. It talks about bones and tubes of bronze, and it's got these plates that are tied close together. You can't get in there. So God talks about these incredible, he's proud of these animals that he's made, and he boasts about them appropriately. So as we dive into the actual animal examples, there's 3 different kinds of basic animals: exoskeleton, skeleton outside; endoskeleton, inside; and then no skeleton, just to prove God could do it any way he wanted. So here's a short refresher on what those mean, those terms.
When you think of a skeleton, you probably imagine the human skeleton with its familiar skull, rib cage, spine, and other bones. Humans are vertebrates, meaning we have backbones. Our skeletons are inside our bodies, so we call them endoskeletons. The prefix endo means within. Your skeleton is like a frame. It supports your body and allows it to move. Humans are not the only species with an endoskeleton. Other vertebrates include amphibians, reptiles, fish, mammals, and birds. Many marine animals have endoskeletons. These include whales, dolphins, polar bears, manatees, penguins, gulls, and at least 20,000 species of fish. Exoskeletons. Only around 10% of all living animal species are vertebrates. The other 90% are known as invertebrates. They don't have backbones. In fact, they don't have any bones at all. They have exoskeletons. That's right, their skeletons are on the outside of their body. One type of exoskeleton is called a hydrostatic skeleton. It is a water-based skeleton, which makes the animals very flexible. They can squeeze through small gaps, making it easier to get away from predators. Most of these animals live in the ocean. They include jellyfish, octopuses, and starfish, but also slugs and worms. Other exoskeletons, such as those of crabs, oysters, and sea urchins, are hard and provide extra protection from predators. However, wearing this armor all the time makes it difficult to move freely, at least compared to the graceful gliding of a fish or the impressive acrobatics of a pod of dolphins. Another problem is that this sort of exoskeleton does not grow, but the animal inside it does. Every so often, the animal will have to shed its exoskeleton and grow a new, bigger one. Or, in the case of a hermit crab, it will leave its old shell behind and move into a new one. Think of it like a soldier taking off all their armor. When an invertebrate sheds its exoskeleton, it is vulnerable to predators.
So that's kind of a problem with exoskeletons, and they manage to survive somehow anyway. So we're going to go next to a really good example of no skeleton, and that's the octopus. So this is your first major example of an animal that's just incredible.
Have you ever wondered how a creature with 3 hearts, a donut-shaped brain, and the ability to change colors within a blink of an eye survives in the deep blue sea? Welcome to our deep dive into the insane biology of the squid. Squids belong to the cephalopod family, a class known for its members' extraordinary intelligence and unique adaptations. Cephalopods, meaning head foot in Greek, is a fitting description for these marine animals which have their feet, or tentacles, attached to their heads. This class of invertebrates includes other incredible creatures such as octopus, cuttlefish, and nautilus. Like their family members, squids exhibit a high degree of intelligence and have complex nervous systems which contribute to their successful survival strategies in diverse ocean environments. The unique characteristics of squids, like their ability to change color, camouflaging, and regeneration, are shared to some extent across the cephalopod family, making them a group of some of the most fascinating creatures beneath the waves. Remarkably, a squid has not 1 or 2, but 3 hearts. 2 of these hearts, known as the gill hearts, are dedicated to pumping blood to the squid's gills, ensuring sufficient oxygenation. When the squid is at rest, these gill hearts pump at a slow and steady rate. However, during vigorous activities such as hunting or evading predators, they kick into high gear, pumping fast to meet the increased demand for oxygen. The 3rd heart, known as the systemic heart, pumps the oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Interestingly, the systemic heart stops beating when the squid swims, conserving energy during motion. This trifecta of hearts enables squids to thrive in various challenging environments of the world's oceans, such as depths up to 2,000 meters and temperatures as low as 0 degrees Celsius. Squids possess the largest eyes in the animal kingdom in proportion to their body size, reaching up to 11 inches in diameter in the colossal squids. These enormous saucer-like eyes provide them exceptional vision, capable of detecting the faintest glimmer of light in their dark deep-sea habitats. One of the most remarkable aspects of the squid biology is their ability to regenerate lost body parts, including arms and tentacles. If a squid loses an arm or a tentacle, it can regrow a new, fully functional, specialized limb, complete with intricate structures such as suckers and nerves. The process begins almost immediately after loss of a limb. Another intriguing aspect of the squid's biology is the remarkable ability to change colors. This phenomenon is primarily driven by a type of cell in the squid's skin known as chromatophore. Each chromatophore is packed with pigment and controlled by muscles that can expand or contract the cell, thereby revealing or hiding the pigment. In terms of camouflage, squids can perfectly match their surroundings, going virtually unnoticed by predators and unsuspecting prey. Some squids harness their color-changing ability to create dazzling, pulsating light shows. This hypnotic effect confuses and mesmerizes their prey, making them easy targets. Squids also use the color and pattern of their skin in order to send signals to other squids. This capability, known as chromatophore control, allows them to communicate with each other in a complex language of color and pattern, as well as identify threats or potential mates. Pattern recognition is another area where squids excel. They can identify and remember the visual patterns of their environment and potential threats or prey. By recognizing these patterns, squids can anticipate and react to changes in their surroundings. For example, if they recognize the pattern of the predator's movement, they can launch a preemptive escape strategy, increasing their chances of survival. Squids come in a wide array of shapes and sizes. The smallest squid, the southern pygmy squid, reaches a maximum length of just 1.6 centimeters, while the colossal squid, possibly the largest invertebrate on the planet, can grow an astounding 14 meters in length. The giant squid, another widely recognized species, can reach lengths up to 13 meters. Using their long, flexible tentacles, they grab their prey and pull it towards their sharp, parrot-like beak. This beak, located at the center of their arms, is capable of tearing through the flesh and shell of their prey, including fish, crustaceans, and even other squids. Then, they use their rodula, a tongue-like organ with rows of tiny teeth, to further break down the prey and aid in digestion. Squids have a unique defense mechanism when they sense danger. They release ink into the water, creating a smoke screen that obscures the predator's view and allows the squid to escape. But squid ink is not just about evasion, it also acts as a chemical deterrent. The ink contains a compound called tyrosinase, which is known to cause temporary blindness in predators and affects their sense of smell.
So there's an incredible array of features that a squid has that no other animal has. The ink issue, this family of animals actually has their brains decentralized into their brains are actually decentralized throughout the animal itself, into the arms and so on. So it's just an incredible animal, and it's very dexterous even though it has no skeleton. So now so we're going to move right into the exoskeleton world, which I'm calling this section of it lobster world. Okay, take a look at this. This is a standard lobster. I don't know if there's such a thing as a standard lobster. But this is two other examples. These are two other examples. On the left, anybody know what that one is? Well, it's labeled. You can probably see. It's a crayfish. On the right is a scorpion. Totally different environments, totally different habitats. The scorpion lives in all kinds of places. It lives, the one on the left is a desert scorpion. The one on the right is in Colorado, in the high altitude area of Colorado. So it lives in all kinds of places. It lives in amphibious areas, in desert areas, in high altitude cold areas, and yet it has the same body plan as the basic lobster, with the same number of legs, 8 legs plus the 2 claw arms. It has the same features in terms of the antenna, and the crab also shares those same features. And again, so God's used this design in multiple ways just to show off, right? Because he can. And so you look at all these different kinds of sort of the lobster family. I'm sure that's not what the people who study these guys would call them, but they all have kind of the same body shape, even though they're quite a bit different. So we're going to go to another kind of endoskeleton. That's the world of insects. We won't stay here very long, but this is a really good example of unique features in an insect body.
Okay, now this has got people outraged because what this little guy will do next is going to cause big problems for a certain group of people. If there was one creature in the animal kingdom that causes evolutionists to question their entire theory, it would be the bombardier beetle. How can I make such a massive claim? Well, you will too when you see what's inside these beetles. Fix your eyes on this. The bombardier beetle contains a masterpiece of engineering design. It has glands in its belly that produce two safe chemicals when kept apart: hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide. But get this, the beetle then sends these chemicals into a sort of storage tank where it keeps them for a rainy day. So, let's see what happens when the bombardier beetle spots trouble ahead. Once unhappy, the beetle, using a complex valve system, sends these two chemicals into another uniquely designed chamber. And from there the beetle secretes a special catalyst of enzymes, which when mixed with the two chemicals create an overpowering spray, which is 100 degrees Celsius. Right, so now we have this scalding hot spray, it's ready. So the bombardier beetle, he sizes up his enemy, he twists his lower body and then rotates the two nozzles at his tail end, and with precise accuracy he erupts his insane combination at anyone who dares to mess with him. And the craziest thing of all is the bombardier beetle lets out not just one, not just two booms, but 500 booms per second to ensure that he is nobody's lunch today. So come on, let's ask the obvious question here. Why does this leave the evolutionist speechless? I'll tell you why. When you look at this incredibly complex system, and you know that this is inside every single bombardier beetle, you have to admit that this system must be carefully designed, because any system involving combustion and the fusion of two powerful chemicals must have a mind behind it. Why? Because anyone who works with combustion knows that many things can go easily wrong. I mean, think about it. If evolution is step-by-step, gradual, unguided changes over millions of years, that means that at some points in the bombardier beetle's history, it had no chemical spray. So what happened the first time that it mixed these two chemicals? When it didn't have any storage tank, and it didn't have anywhere to hold it, how would it store this 100 degrees mixture? And how did it manage to eject and release this spray if it hadn't yet evolved these two nozzles at its tail end? And then the other thing that's got me thinking is, what about the storage chambers when they were evolving? How did the first storage chambers have the durability, the thickness not to melt whilst holding this red hot fusion?
So it does beg the question about how these separate parts could have come about through gradual steps of evolution. And I think I agree with him that it's very unlikely that that would have been the case. So let's move on to another example of our endoskeleton. Endoskeleton is now the skeleton on the inside. And if you do a search on Google and you look for unusual animals, you'll come up with all kinds of examples. This one says, this furry potato is an evolutionary mystery, but we're not going to look at him. We're going to look at something else. This is the platypus.
Deep in Victoria's Otway Ranges swims a cute little riddle, wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. It's venomous. It has the sixth sense, and it looks like it's borrowed all of its body parts from different animals. The platypus. It's across the east and southeast coast of Australia and throughout Tasmania. The platypus is one of two members of the monotreme order. And they're smaller than you might think, only measuring about 50 centimeters long. Unlike placental mammals and marsupials, which both give birth to live young, monotremes are mammals that lay eggs. The platypus has a bill like a duck, a tail like a beaver, webbed feet like an otter, electroreceptors like a shark. They lay eggs like a turtle. They have their limbs on their sides like reptiles. They don't have stomachs and lack teeth like echidnas. And they have venom like a viper. The platypus looks like what happens when evolution hits the shuffle button. But this couldn't be further from the truth. While their variety of parts makes them look like a freshwater chimera, all of their disparate features come together perfectly to create the ultimate mashup, resulting in one highly effective weirdo. Freshwater is murky by nature, and if you're going to hunt in it, you need to rely on something other than your eyes. And so, the platypus has evolved a superpower, electroreception. Commonly found in sharks, chimeras, and a few other cartilaginous fish species, platypus have bills lined with tiny dots called electroreceptors. Whenever you move a muscle, the contraction generates an electric field. The platypus uses the electroreceptors in the skin of their bills to calculate the voltage difference around them, allowing them to target the electric fields of moving prey with pinpoint accuracy. Their bills are also very sensitive. They can detect even the slightest of touches. The platypus's bill is the perfect sensory organ for hunting prey in the dark and murky freshwater depths. They're so effective that they hunt with their eyes and nose closed. Spending about 40% of the night actively looking for food, they need to be well equipped. While bills are great for housing large numbers of electroreceptors, they are also perfect for their feeding strategy. Their bills allow them to bite into the muck and push out any excess mud and water before swallowing. One consequence of the development of electroreceptors is that adult platypuses have no teeth whatsoever. In order to crunch up their meals, they have to scoop up small rocks and press them against the tops of their bills. Platypuses also lack stomachs. Similar to echidnas, their food is digested by going straight from the esophagus to the intestine. Their lack of stomach is so ancient that the part of the mammalian DNA in charge of making a stomach and the digestive compounds in it are entirely gone. Borrowing yet another strategy, but this time from crocodiles, on top of the platypus's bill are two nostrils. This positioning allows them to stick a little bit of their snout and just the tops of their torsos out of the water to breathe without giving away their position to predators. When they dive, they close their nostrils. The second most iconic thing about the platypus is their wide tail, an adaptation that they share with a species on the other side of the world, the beaver. These tails are perfectly evolved for a life in the water, offering the platypus both excellent propulsion and steering. But they also have a surprising use: carrying things. These tails are quite dexterous, and they use them to carry reeds and sticks to construct their burrows. Next up, we have the platypus's rather unusual feet. They resemble otter feet in that they are heavily webbed, but the closer you look, the weirder they get. Their webbing extends well beyond the tips of their fingers, leading to their claws being in a very strange place, halfway up their feet. This offers a good compromise for both digging and swimming. Their feet are similar to scuba fins, as the webbing extends beyond where the actual bone is. This allows them to be much larger than they would be if the webbing stopped at the fingertips, as it does in most web-footed species. But beyond strange webbing, male platypuses have an extra weird adaptation on their hind limbs. They have sharp spurs, sharp, venomous spurs. Male platypuses use their venom primarily during the mating season in combat with other male platypuses. Interestingly, the venom, while it does share chemical properties and effects with reptile venom, is not meant to kill or even permanently damage tissue. Platypus venom is meant to subdue competing males while they mate with prospective females. While it may seem strange for a mammal to have venom, they're not the only ones that do. Some shrews have it too.
So you can see the language that they use throughout. They just can't help themselves from using the terms like adaptation or borrowed from. These are all evolutionary assumptions without any evidence. They could easily have said it's designed with this feature and the meaning would be exactly the same, but they don't tend to do it that way. So again, just the features Lays eggs, duck-like beak, tail similar to a beaver's, legs like an otter's, venomous, electroreceptors, eyes combined mammalian and reptilian features. They don't talk about that in this section of the video. No stomach. Its throat connects directly to its intestines. And then, interestingly enough, the fur glows in ultraviolet light. So there's no other animal that has this combination of features. I think God was just having kind of a fun time when he created this animal, and it's perfectly designed to do what it does in the environment where it finds itself. And then what do we find people talking about as far as how this animal came into being? A truly fascinating product of evolution. Okay, so I'm not going to beat you up with evolution tonight. We're going to try and focus on the animals, but I just want to point out you will hear that language throughout the videos, because you can't find videos other than in creationist sources that have a more balanced perspective on God's role in this whole thing. So let's go to a very brief look at woodpeckers. One of the interesting things about woodpeckers is that they have this tongue that extends out of its mouth and curls up inside the head so that it can extend farther. And you'll see that same thing in hummingbirds. But it's, again, how would you get a woodpecker which pecks a hole into a tree and then tries to pull out the insects that are there? And then the tongue itself has this sticky section and barbs so that it can drag unsuspecting and uncooperative meals out of the wood. How would you get a woodpecker to survive by pecking into the tree? It has a reinforced head, by the way. How can it survive while it's developing those characteristics? And again, you get the idea. So let's turn our attention to a different kind of bird, and this will be the penguin. Again, a very good example of an unusual set of features for a bird.
Emperor penguins are downright strange creatures. No other animal can survive the cold like they can. No other animal is so wonderfully and bizarrely adapted to life on the ice, but also life in the sea. The emperor penguin is considered the deepest diving bird in the world, reaching depths far beyond 500 meters and capable of staying under frigid waters for up to 30 minutes at a time. Their feathers not only streamline their swimming, but can also be actively manipulated to create an air injection, providing a hydrodynamic boost we normally only see in high-tech ships and underwater missiles. And to keep warm during their life in the frigid sea and windy sheets of ice, they've evolved a unique composition of feathers that don't just retain their body heat, but actively draw in heat from an environment that seems like it doesn't have any. They also utilize sea ice as a breeding ground, and if this wasn't impressive enough, they choose to use the ice to breed in the harsh Antarctic winter, where temperatures can reach 50 degrees Celsius below freezing, the coldest breeding temperature any known bird can tolerate. And despite all these incredible adaptations, we humans were certain for a long time that emperor penguins were the lowest form of bird, an evolutionary straggler inferior to the rest. But this could not be farther from the truth. The body shape of an emperor penguin lends itself to maneuvering beneath the ice, and while it might not always look like it, emperor penguins are among the most elite swimmers on the planet. But there is so much more to their underwater story than their big-boned, streamlined body. There are some unexpected ways in which they maximize their swimming efficiency, things we thought were reserved for our high-tech ships and submarines. One of these adaptations was discovered when marine ecology researchers looking at footage of emperor penguins ascending noted that the birds were always followed by fine bubbles that seemed to emerge from their feathers, in much the same way that an underwater missile would leave a trail of bubbles in its wake. And with some torpedoes, these bubbles are no accident. In the 1960s, engineers discovered that in theory, drag could be reduced on underwater vessels if microbubbles were injected on their surfaces, covering them in a thin film of air. In footage of penguins ascending, it's easy to see the bubble trails, and if you pause the footage, you can even see the bubble clouds that envelop most of the body and obscure the tail and hind limbs. Scientists also note that no air is coming from the beak or nares. It emerges from the plumage. And the boost they seem to get from this is significant. Penguins descend and swim horizontally at around 2 meters per second, but they ascend with these bubbles at up to 6 meters per second. And this is critical, because they need sufficient speed to overcome gravity as they leap out of the water and onto the sea ice. Like many air-breathing divers, the emperor penguin diving reflex involves a massive reduction in their heart rate that allows many organs, including the heart itself, to use up less oxygen. One study that attached electrodes to penguins during diving revealed that for extremely deep dives, heart rates can reach as low as 3 beats per minute. To complement this diving reflex, emperor penguins also employ peripheral vasoconstriction. Here, the birds are able to narrow blood vessels to such a point that they can effectively cut off certain muscles from their overall blood circulation. This allows the blood and the oxygen it carries to be distributed to more important muscle groups and organs, like to the brain and the heart. On a molecular level, the emperor penguin is also exceptional at storing large amounts of oxygen relative to its size. For example, myoglobin, a protein that stores and supplies skeletal muscles with oxygen, is considerably elevated in some muscles of emperor penguins, especially their pectoral muscles. On the other hand, hemoglobin, the protein mostly found in the blood and responsible for distributing oxygen to the different parts of the body, has a considerably higher affinity for oxygen in the emperor penguin compared to other birds. When scientists pointed cameras at an emperor penguin colony, they discovered something almost paradoxical. Most of the outer surface of the emperor penguin's plumage was actually colder than the surrounding Antarctic air. This can happen when the sky is clear and excess heat is lost from the outer surface of the body due to radiative cooling. And because hot air naturally flows towards areas of cooler temperatures, emperor penguins can suck in heat via convection, almost commanding the heat in the surrounding air towards themselves. The penguins manage to do this without actually feeling the colder-than-air plumage, because the plumage itself is a very poor thermal conductor, preventing any outward heat transfer from the warmer inner surfaces of the penguin. To add an extra layer of warmth, emperor penguins also engage in what researchers call social thermoregulation, which basically means that they huddle together in groups to share and conserve body heat. Since the vast, frigid expanse of the Antarctic isn't exactly the best place to set up a nest, and there are no bushes or branches, the females hand over the egg to their male partners, who are tasked with incubating the eggs on their feet under a loose fold of featherless skin called the brood patch. And because the eggs must be kept warm at all times, the males do so for an astounding 4 months straight, without any food at all, relying only on their body fat until the chicks hatch around July.
Well, again, a very specially designed set of features to allow this animal to survive in the harsh environment in which it does. This one has kind of an end that sets up the next video we're going to do, so we'll go ahead and watch this one.
We now know that penguins are far from the most primitive birds in existence. The flightlessness of penguins, which was initially thought to be an ancestral trait after having freshly evolved from reptiles, is actually a secondary evolved trait. The ancestor of penguins would have been a flying bird, similar to a puffin or a cormorant. But over time, the penguin's ancestor got better at swimming and worse at flying. And then, around 60 million years ago, the penguin clade split off, losing their ability to fly entirely, and gaining what researchers refer to as a hyper-specialized marine body plan. The transition from having a body built for flying to one hyper-specialized to survive in a marine environment is one of the greatest evolutionary transitions of all time, up there with when tetrapods first stepped foot on land, or when the ancestors of whales took their steps back into the sea.
One of the things that's buried in there is this idea that the penguin evolved from flighted bird to flightless, and from whales, that whales started out as land animals. So that gives us our long story short video.
You want to hear something silly? Bears can't parallel park. You want to hear something even sillier? Darwin thought that bears could turn into whales. Back in the 1800s, when Darwin first published The Origin of Species, this is exactly what he said. And he was brutally mocked by scientists of his day for thinking something so ridiculous. He even retracted the idea from later editions of his book. But here's the kicker. Scientists of today think essentially the same thing. Stupid Darwin thinks bears could have turned into whales. How ridiculous. Everyone knows these wolf, pig, weasel, hippo things or it turned into whales. My, how the tables have turned. Back in the 80s and the 90s, a series of fossils were found that rocked the evolutionary landscape. Paleontologists thought that they had found a clear transitional series of fossils documenting the evolution of whales. University of Chicago evolutionary biologist Jerry Coyne says in his book Why Evolution is True, whales happen to have an excellent fossil record, courtesy of their aquatic habits and robust, easily fossilized bones. This is one of our best examples of an evolutionary transition. Wow, one of the best. Let's take a look at the story behind whale evolution. Is it a good argument or not? So according to Coyne, whale evolution is such great evidence since we have a chronologically ordered series of fossils, and it goes something like this. The sequence begins with a raccoon-sized animal called Indohyus, living 48 million years ago. 52 million years ago, we see a wolf-sized creature called Pakicetus, which is a bit more whale-like than Indohyus. At 50 million years ago, there's the remarkable Ambulocetus. Rhodocetus, 47 million years ago, is even more aquatic. Finally, at 40 million years ago, we find the fossils Basilosaurus and Dorodon, before we have our modern whales. Let's take a look a little bit closer at this chronologically ordered series of fossils. If you're paying attention, you might be thinking something fishy is going on here, but no, you'd be wrong. That would not be a bad pun because whales are mammals, not fish. But also, yes, something mammally was going on here. Granting the standard Darwinian dates for these fossils, Indohyus is dated as far younger than his supposed descendants. And he's not the only one, more on that later. This is common practice in evolutionary analysis, to ignore where species actually show up in the fossil record and place them wherever makes Darwinian sense, creating what are called chronological inversions, or ghost lineages. Oh, that's so spooky. The fossil record often reveals fossils out of the order that they're supposed to be in. For just a couple of other examples, let's take a look at bird evolution. It's supposed to go theropod dinosaurs evolving into birds, with the fossil Archaeopteryx being evidence of this as an intermediate fossil. But the problem is he appears long before the dinosaurs he was supposed to have descended from. Evolution also got a big stick in its spokes with this guy, Tiktaalik, a fish-like creature that was for years crowned as the smoking gun transitional fossil of fish starting to go from the sea to the land. Brilliant evidence, just what they expected. Until in 2010, fossil footprints of true tetrapods were found in Poland, long before they were supposed to have evolved. And all of a sudden Tiktaalik was dethroned as a transitional fossil because again, the dates are all out of order. Hey everybody, I'd like you to meet my grandpa. Oh, so cute. Is that his name or? No, his name is Seymour. He is my grandpa. What? Doesn't make any sense. Back to the chronologically ordered series of fossils, Basilosaurus and Dorodon are considered fully aquatic whales. They're not a transition to anything. Okay, maybe they're just trying to pad their numbers a little bit, big deal. Surely the rest of the fossils are intermediate and transitional, right? Well, that depends on how you define intermediate. In paleontology, intermediate doesn't mean what we think it means. Like my parents are intermediate between me and my Gam Gam and Pop Pop.
Oh, hello, sweetie.
Hi, Gam Gam.
Oh my, how tall you've grown. Ah, but you're so skinny. Would you like your Gam Gam to make you a nice pot pie? You know, staying healthy is...
By intermediate, paleontologists usually mean a fossil is merely morphologically intermediate. In other words, if a fossil has features of a supposed ancestor and descendant, then it is classified as an intermediate or transitional fossil. But with that definition, I would be a morphological intermediate between this jockey and this professional basketball player. But that doesn't say anything about lineage, whether I'm an ancestor or descendant of either one. We could be completely unrelated, or even chronologically out of order, that wouldn't matter. The very thing they're trying to prove, the ancestral relationship, or how they came about, is pure assumption. This is how they can say there's tons of intermediate fossils and be technically correct, while at the same time skeptics can say, yeah, there aren't really any intermediate fossils, and also be correct. The fossil evidence is so meager that Darwinists, in order to prove evolutionary ancestry, they have to use a slippery definition that no one would accept in other areas of life. But for the sake of argument, let's ignore that problem because there's another one. Is there even enough time for the transition from land to water to hypothetically take place? Again, taking the standard evolutionary numbers for granted, we've got about 8 to 10 million years to go from the land mammal Pakicetus to fully aquatic whales. It sure seems like a whole lot of time. It's almost enough time for me to watch a Lord of the Rings marathon with someone who has a really small bladder. But is it enough time for whales to have evolved? The field of population genetics is devoted to calculating how long something like this would take. In the past, it was assumed that this was relatively simple to do, as easy as falling off a log. But more recently, scientists at Cornell University calculated how long it would take for different organisms to evolve 2 simple, beneficial mutations. For fruit flies with their relatively large population sizes and speedy generation times, it'd only take a few million years for 2 mutations to become fixed. For larger mammals like humans, who have much smaller population sizes and longer generation times, they calculated it would take over 200 million years. Again, that's only for 2 beneficial mutations. Okay, so where would whales and their supposed ancestors fall on that timescale? They're not as quick to reproduce as flies, but quicker than humans. So for 2 simple, beneficial mutations, that's supposed to take roughly 43.3 million years. So the evidence shows, using their own assumptions and calculations, that they don't even have 1/4 of the time needed for even 2 simple mutations. And it takes quite a lot of changes to go from the land to the water, it turns out, including some of these lovely attributes.
Concurrent heat exchange system for intra-abdominal crustaceans, ball vertebra for vertical swinging action, tail flukes and musculature for efficient power zones, blubber, temperature insulation, modified damage, to nurse young underwater, fetus and breathe position for labor underwater, special lung surfactants to be able to take in air after swimming at crushing depths, organs transformed into flippers and reduction of volumes, reduction of pelvis and sacral vertebra, reorganization of musculature for reproductive organs, modification of the teeth, modification of the eye, front of vision, hydrodynamic properties of the skin, emergence and accretion, mandibular fat pad with complex lipid distribution, reorganization of skull bone musculature, modification of air bones, decoupling of esophagus, trachea, emergence of blood musculature and neurological control, synthesis and metabolism of isolaric acid, and more.
So, how many mutations does it take to change a Pachycetus? Ooh, I know this joke. 3. 1 to hold it and 2 to turn the ladder. How many mutations does it take to change a Pachycetus to a whale? Not where I would have gone with that joke, but what do I know? To put that in context, take giraffes and their derpy little short-necked pals, the okapi. They're quite similar, and a recent paper studied their differences and found surprisingly 70 different genes that likely contributed to the giraffe's appearance. If animals that similar required 70 gene changes for basically just a longer neck and stronger heart, it's a pretty safe bet that animals as different as Pachycetus and whales would require at least as many, and more likely many thousands more. But it gets worse. Recently, a new basilosauride fossil was found in Antarctica that, even using the most generous dates for Darwinists, cuts down the time available for the whale transition to about half of the already not enough time of 8 million years, and could even place fully aquatic whales before Rhodocetus, before Ambulocetus and contemporary with, or even before Pachycetus, destroying the entire fossil timeline. So is the whale transitional fossil series any good? Well, once you take into account the padding of their numbers, the chronological inversions, the ghost lineages, more recent fossil finds that discredit the timeline, and their creative use of definitions for what it even means to be a transitional fossil, the mathematical problems using their own numbers, they're all very clever tricks. But once you see how all of this works, it's quite a bit less impressive. To be fair, scientists aren't doing this maliciously. They really believe that evolution is just obviously true. So they reason, whether we have 8 million years or 4 million years, lots of fossils or no fossils. If evolution is true and we have whales today, then they must have been able to evolve, regardless of any problems that pop up. But if you don't presuppose evolution, if you treat it as a hypothesis rather than an assumption, then problems like these become far more difficult to hand-wave away. So these fossil finds certainly are interesting and worth debating, but there's a lot more to it than the uncritical, glossy, one-sided story being told. If this is one of the best evidences for evolution, what does that mean for their other evidence that's not as good?
sperm whale codas sort of sound like Morse code, and the patterns of the clicks are distinct among social groups, with each clan having its own specific repertoire of codas. These codas are the social glue that holds the clans together. Females use codas more than males, which makes sense when you think about how they raise their young.
No, it's probably social communication. It's probably communication with the calves. It's communications with each other. They might simply be advertising how deep they've gone so that the calf that can't follow them knows where the mother is at all times, even though the mother's farther away from the calf. The depth that the whale goes to will distort the sound. So by the time the calf hears it, it has some information about that distortion that tells it how deep the mother has dove. And that would give it some idea of anticipating when the mother's coming back up again.
And more than just signaling each other's location, researchers believe distinct coda repertoires represent their own unique cultures. Just as groups of people from different sides of the world will speak, eat, and dress differently, clans of sperm whales from different areas will behave differently too. And the more researchers investigate these codas, the more they realize just how much information could be packed into these patterns of sound. So much information that researchers are starting to realize that sperm whale language is perhaps as complex as our own. The first major hint that codas are not just instinctual and arbitrary noises is the fact that calves can take up to 2 years to produce recognizable codas. And before that, they babble, just like human babies. And recently, researchers realized that not only do clans use different codas, but the codas differ slightly among individuals. This could be a way for each individual to have a unique identifier, aka a name. The whales aren't just making noise, they are literally talking. When a group of researchers looked at the historic recordings of whaling in the 19th century, they found that successful harpoon strikes dropped by more than 50% after the first few years of hunting. That dramatic of a change can't be attributed solely to the skill of the whalers. Instead, researchers think the sperm whales were sharing strategies with one another about how to evade capture. Sperm whale codas may be the closest thing to our language we have ever discovered.
At the surface, a sperm whale will only spend a brief moment preparing for its incredible way of life. They can spend as little as 8 minutes at the surface breathing, letting the oxygen seep through their blood and enrich their muscles, before submerging and making the journey into the deep. After pushing their bodies some of the way, eventually their Goliath mass will just allow them to freefall and sink into the abyss. As the water temperature drops and the sunlight fades to a fraction of the surface, they have reached their fishing grounds. Using their sonar to interrogate the darkness, picking up body shapes vastly different to anything found at the surface, as the animals found here have evolved under completely different parameters due to the conditions. Yet, a sperm whale will spend the majority of its life here. Such an alien environment for a mammal of all creatures to have found itself in. An animal that has an ancestry going back to walking on dry land. And it isn't just sperm whales that have adapted to hunt in the deep sea. There are several other groups of whales that have adapted to dive into the abyss for their food as well. And these whales aren't closely related, and have evolved to be deep-sea divers on separate occasions. So why don't these beasts hunt near the surface? What lures these giants into the deep? The other deep-sea diving whales are pilot whales and the beaked whales. Pilot whales are related to oceanic dolphins, and beaked whales are distantly related to sperm whales, so most likely all of these whales adapted to dive into the deep separately from each other. It depends on the region, but sperm whales regularly dive to around 400 to 1200 meters and spend about 45 minutes to an hour underwater, and do this multiple times a day. But some individuals can exceed 2000 meters on rare occasions. However, the award for the deepest diving whale, or deepest diving mammal ever recorded, is actually the Cuvier's beaked whale, with one exceptional whale diving to 2,992 meters while holding its breath for over 2 hours. On average, all of the deep-sea whales dive to similar depths, diving to what is known as the mesopelagic zone, or twilight zone, named because although incredibly dark, a tiny amount of sunlight can still just about be detected. At over 1,000 meters into the ocean, the pressure of the water will be over 100 times greater than at the surface. At these depths, sperm whales feed on a variety of different deep-sea creatures like skates, sharks, and octopus, However, study of their stomach contents has shown that squid make up the vast majority of their diet. Studying the stomach contents of sperm whales found off the coast of California has shown they routinely dine on dozens of different species of squid, including large species that they most likely catch on a daily basis, like the clubhook squid. And although not the most common species among the collection, there were plenty of squid beaks that would have belonged to the giant squid, showing that they regularly hunt and eat them too. Although the prey sperm whales consume could be different depending on the region they live. However, sperm whales are known to travel incredibly long distances and don't really have territories. For example, the whales studied were from the North Pacific, but at least 2 colossal squid beaks were discovered in their stomachs as well, and colossal squid live in the depths of the Southern Ocean that wraps around Antarctica.
Passages on this idea of the Leviathan, which is the seagoing incredible creature that God boasts about proudly, and that's really cool. If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing him is false. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who can stand against me? So we can learn things about God from the animals and what God thinks about the animals. Clearly not a whale. Flames and dart from his mouth. Just incredible stuff. So real briefly, we're going to go to hummingbird.
Is it a bird? Is it a bee? Perhaps it's a little of both. A hummingbird. Of course, a hummingbird isn't an insect, but now biologists have discovered that insects such as bees can unlock some enduring hummingbird mysteries. Hummingbirds are warm-blooded, hollow-boned, and feather-winged, just like all birds. But they stand out with an impressive list of features and some extreme biology. They're the smallest of birds. One species measures just 5 centimeters from beak to tail. But relative to its size, the hummingbird has the largest brain of any bird. And it also has the largest heart of any animal relative to its own body weight. Its brain processes visual motion in a unique way. Most animals' brains are tuned to detect motion from behind better than other types of motion. Hummingbirds sense movement equally in all directions. This allows them to hover and fly with precision, evade predators, and perform flamboyant mating displays to impress females. The hummingbird's heart is just as impressive, capable of beating over 1,000 times a minute, pumping blood to its enormous flight muscles to power wings that can flap up to 80 times a second. Most other flying birds beat their wings fewer than 5 times a second. Hummingbirds burn a massive amount of energy to sustain their rapid wing beat. With the exception of insects, they have the fastest metabolism of any animal. Every day, they need to consume half their weight in sugar. They do this by pumping 10 drops of nectar out of a flower every 15 milliseconds, with a tongue so long it coils up inside their head when it's retracted. In the case of the sword-billed hummingbird, that tongue is encased in the world's longest bird beak, relative to size. Hummingbirds also require protein to survive, so they've become adept aerial hunters of tiny insects. Their flying skills really set them apart. Nearly a decade ago, biologists proved that hummingbirds fly more like insects than like birds. Just like dragonflies and bees, They can hover for long periods, even flying backwards or upside down. No other bird is capable of such aerial acrobatics. Most birds flap their wings up and down, generating their lift force on the downstroke of the wing. But hummingbirds rotate their wings in a figure-of-8 motion. This movement creates air currents that generate lift from both the upstroke and the downstroke. It allows them to hover and perform insect-like maneuvers, despite having the same physiology as other birds. Insect wings are flexible, but the wings of a hummingbird are constrained by a skeleton. So they achieve insect-like flight by rotating their shoulders 180 degrees. Now it's been found that hummingbirds are even more like insects than we previously thought. It was once believed that hummingbirds had a better understanding of the world than lowly insects. But comparing hummingbirds to bees has resulted in an extraordinary discovery. The hummingbird uses the same sort of intelligence as a bee to navigate its complex world of shape and color. Experiments show that both animals can actually remember the locations of the most rewarding, nectar-rich flowers in a field filled with blooms, or a tree laden with blossom. And once they find them, they devise well-defined circuits to repeatedly visit these flowers in virtually the same order. They even take the shortest routes to save flying time and energy. Birds and bees took separate evolutionary paths at least 600 million years ago. Birds flew up the evolutionary ladder, while insects hovered on the lower rungs. But despite their place, insects like bees may hold the key to our understanding of some of the hummingbird's most extraordinary behavior.
If you look in the wild, if you're out in a nature park, you might miss this. Anybody see the nest in that picture? It's pretty well camouflaged, but it's right in the middle. So I was able to go to a nature park and take some of these pictures of hummingbirds. And this one's really unique because it's actually a mother hummingbird feeding her young. And she kind of regurgitates some of the nectar that she's captured from flowers and is feeding her young in the nest there. Really cool to see that live. Is giraffes.
Giraffes are actually very strong evidence that animals did not gradually evolve over millions of years. You already know that giraffes have 6-foot long necks, but did you know that every time a giraffe does this, it could be potentially over for our long-necked friends if, and the big if is, they were not designed by an intelligent designer. The fact is this, each giraffe has a 25-pound heart. Why is it so big? Well, the giraffe's heart has a very trying job to do. It has to pump a huge amount of blood all the way up the neck towards the head whilst working against gravity. Here is the problem with step-by-step evolutionary modifications. Because if the giraffe's mega heart is constantly pumping large amounts of blood to the head, what happens when the giraffe bends its neck right down to drink from a water hole? Suddenly, all of that power would of course rush an insane amount of blood and pressure to the giraffe's brain, which would cause the giraffe at best to pass out, and at worst, well, it doesn't bear thinking about. Because fortunately, the giraffe was intelligently designed to be able to cope with this dilemma. Inside every giraffe is an irreducibly complex system. The giraffe's blood vessels are unique in that they have reinforced walls with bypass valves, and these valves are instructed exactly when to open and when to close by sensor signals, which tell the giraffe whether to restrict the blood flow to the brain or to release it. But here's the real fingerprints of a creator on the giraffe. Supposing that these moderating blood vessels let a little bit too much blood through the bypass valves, what happens then? Well, I'm glad you asked, because inside of the giraffe's head is a genius sponge-like design which absorbs too much blood and then releases the exact amount to the brain until the giraffe's blood pressure equalizes. Oh, and by the way, just a little throwaway comment here. Once the giraffe has refreshed its palate and lifts its head up, this complex system knows exactly how to work in reverse, so then you don't get problems with too much blood then rushing away from the head.
So feel free to keep getting more popcorn, water, whatever, but we're going to start this, and you can just find your way to your seat whenever you choose.
If you open the work of a lepidopterist, someone who studies butterflies, somewhere in that writing, you're going to find the language of astonishment.
Every one of these 20,000 species have different color patterns, and every one of them has different shaped wings. The diversity is just so magnificent.
As you watch a butterfly, to describe what you're looking at, you can't really put it into words. That's biology, it's also magic.
It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. Their metamorphosis, their life cycle, how did this happen? This astonishing, remarkable transformation.
In a metamorphic insect, what you've got is two body plans. You have to first form one functional body plan, and then you have to switch gears and you have to take and form a new body plan. I am amazed by development when it goes from egg to caterpillar, because it's such an intricate process. But then you have to enter into the chrysalis stage and you have to get it right again. So it's like the problem squared.
You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built. It's very carefully engineered. So you got to know where you're going to end up before you start.
It's like a different organism. Transitions have to take place in the heart. Transitions have to take place in the antennae. Transitions have to take place in the reproductive organs.
You have to recreate adult legs, adult antennae, adult eyes. You have to change the shape of the brain and the connections between the antennae and the eyes. You have to reformat the gut so that it switches from eating plant material to eating nectar. You begin to see the depths of the problem. So for evolution to have created this sort of pathway gradually, it would take a miracle.
When you see certain effects in nature, It's your responsibility as an investigator to find the cause that will explain the effect. If you saw a mechanical device of the sophistication of a butterfly, you would not for a moment hesitate to ascribe that to intelligence, because the butterfly is so much more sophisticated, almost beyond our comprehension, than anything that we make. Planning, foresight, artistry, engineering. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world.
So if you're not convinced yet, you're probably beyond convincing if this hasn't kind of touched your heart. As Nelson talks about earlier on, the language of amazement has to invade this whole process of the butterfly's transformation. The caterpillar cannot reproduce, so it's a dead-end street. And God has given us this amazing picture of his creativity and just his delight in color and the incredible different designs of each butterfly. Anyways, it's a story that amazes me, and I hope it gripped you as well. And I hope you are able to worship God as you think through the implications of this butterfly metamorphosis. So next week we will take an entirely different direction, and we will go into outer space, and we'll look at. We've been looking at different ways of discovering design in the universe that God made, and we've done that through the ideas of intelligent design and irreducible complexity. You guys have hung with us through some challenging times, and we've done some really fun things, I hope. Next week's going to be out of this world. We're going to look at the universe. We're going to look at some aspects of the way God designed the universe that, again, show unmistakable evidence of a designer. So let me pray for us, and we'll if anybody has questions tonight, because of the time, we will be outside once we pick up the chairs and pick up our stuff, and they want us out 8:45-ish. So let me pray for us, and we'll release you for the rest of your evening. Thank you for being with us. Lord, we thank you for this incredible example of your creativity in the form of insects that start into a completely different form. Thanks for the way that points to you, and for the way that Paul Nelson and Ann Gager and the other people in this video have told that story so well. We praise you, we honor you, we're in awe of you, and we thank you for this night in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.